Welcome to John Swinfield's Big Business Podcast. And now, let me introduce your host, journalist and writer, John Swinfield.
Hello, I'm John Swinfield. Welcome to Big Business. I'm a journalist and television producer, and I spent much of my life writing and making films about business bosses. I hope you find this pod gossipy, irreverent, informative, and even fun. If you like the feed, please don't forget to click the subscriber button. Big Business is on every week at 11 a.m. GMT on Wednesdays. Hello everybody, my name's John Swinfield. I'm a journalist, television producer and author. I've worked in Fleet Street, ITV and the BBC. I was a presenter of the Money programme on BBC Two, and I created and presented a series called Enterprise for ITV, which were portraits of business people around the world. I've also written history books about airships, of all things, and early submarines, and a couple of novels. I've got an MA in maritime history, about which I'll be doing other podcasts. My introduction to big business was half a brick and a gashed head. As a young reporter, I was outside Emil Savundra's home in Bishop's Avenue, Hampstead, in London, known as Millionaires' Row. Savundra was a Sri Lankan fraudster on a grand scale, and his house had been staked out by the world's press. When the other reporters left for fresh stories, I'd been told by my news agency to hang around and to get extra quotes. I'd rung the bell without response and sat for hours in the agency's old VW Beetle car. In the late afternoon, the door opened and a woman stepped out. When I walked towards her, she started screeching, picked up a brick and hurled it, catching my forehead. She ran back inside, slamming the door, as I staggered back to the car, dripping blood, looking as if I was wanted by the police, and thinking that perhaps journalism had not been the wisest choice of career. I'd spent the previous 3 years as an apprentice, an indentured cub reporter on a weekly paper, the Bedfordshire Times, where one of the most exciting things occurred when it printed a list of wedding presents, which included a toaster, a kettle, an electric blanket, and a chiming cock. The Fleet Street news agency for whom I laboured was run by Tommy Bryant. He drove a huge American estate car with a smashed-in back window, said to have been shot out by a criminal contact that he hadn't paid. He had thick tufts of hair which sprouted from each ear, rather like shaving brushes. He employed several young reporters, fresh from the provinces. We were hard-working, keen-eyed, and, most importantly, we were cheap. He'd install me in a bedsit in a Croydon back street, 1 bathroom to 4 bed-sitters, and a telephone down the hall. He'd ring in the small hours, shouting that I was absolutely effing useless, and that if I didn't sharpen up, he'd make sure I never worked in journalism again, ever, for anybody, anywhere in the world. A helpful Pakistani electrician in a bedsit next to mine fixed my gas meter to save on bills. I was a little concerned that his discipline was in electricity rather than gas. I was always awake when Bryant rang, worrying the house was going to blow up, taking most of West Croydon with it. After escaping the clutches of Bryant, his capers infamous the length and breadth of Fleet Street, my life assumed a semblance of normality. I joined the London office of United Newspapers, which was a large group of leading provincial newspapers and magazines. The London editor was the charming Drew Webster. At my interview, he noted that I worked for Bryant. "No wonder you look ill, boy," he said. "Everybody who works for Tommy ends up looking like you." This is a story of business, industry and money, much of it off camera, not the saga of a scribe harking back to the glory days of the Street of Ink. So I'll précis my CV. After United, the Daily Mail and Anglia Television, I joined Nationwide on BBC One, and later the Money programme on BBC Two, where I had my first taste of business, apart, that is, from flying bricks. You've been listening to Big Business. This is John Swinfield signing off. Don't forget to click on subscribe. I'm on every Wednesday at 11 a.m. GMT.